Hello, I'm Barry Shaw from the View from Israel. By the wonders of Skype, I'm speaking to you from here in Netanya, Israel, connected via Stockholm, Sweden, by my friend Lawrence Berger and producer of Cool TV. Today, we'll be talking about the subject, perhaps the only subject in your life right now, which is the coronavirus, the Wuhan virus, the China virus, whatever you want to call it. And the idea came from Lawrence himself when I was chatting to him about this issue. He said it would be a good idea to have a program in which I could give you the perspective of how we're coping and what's happening here in Israel, and do a comparative study with what has been happening at the same time in Sweden, Lawrence's country. And I'm very thankful to Lawrence for introducing me to our special guest, who will give the Swedish perspective. And I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Michael Cohn. Welcome to The View from Israel, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Barry, on the show. First time I'm listening or being part of the show, and I think this is a very interesting discussion, because whenever I speak to any Israeli or American, I get questions about Sweden, and so I think there's a lot of interest here for what's going on.
I think it's going to be very interesting to our listeners. But before we get into the details of the virus thing, give us some of your background. You're a doctor in Sweden, but tell us something about your family history. Go back a generation.
Oh, generation. Okay, I'm first generation Swedish. My parents came from the war. My father came as an 11-year-old, 39, on a kinder transport from Germany with his grandmother. He was happy to be able to stay in Stockholm as an 11-year-old. During the war, he experienced the November pogroms in Berlin. He went to the only Jewish school there in Berlin, and his parents were smart enough to get him out of Germany in time. So he went to school here in Sweden and grew up. And then right after the war, my mother came to Sweden. She's Hungarian and came from the Holocaust through the white ambulances, the Bernadotte, the rescue operation that rescued also very many Hungarian Jewish women. And they met as young teenagers and got married and had three children. I'm the middle one, and as a good Jewish boy, you become a doctor and train medicine, and then you go into business. So I have a combination of being an MD and a businessman, and also very Zionistic. My father always said, if his parents managed to escape to Norway and perished from there, so he always said, if there would have been in Israel at that time, you would have had grandparents. And so you become very Zionistic, and he was and I also been engaged myself in the Jewish community here. And now I'm president of Keren Hayesod for Sweden. That's a short, but I also have a foot in Israel because I have two sons who's been locked down in Tel Aviv. So I've been following the virus pretty closely, and what Israel's been doing. I managed to get out of Israel middle of January myself, and went to the States and came back to Sweden when the lockdown was really in place. So, and I'm also active in the business in Israel. I'm actually CEO of a startup. We'll talk about it later. Being very active in the old age, long-term care. So I'm very, very involved in the long-term care and the healthcare situation, because our device is incontinence device, an external incontinence device for women, and the main market is long-term care and home care for elderly women. So I've been following what's going on very closely in this place also. So I will tell you, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, but I have followed both the political debate and the medical. So that's going to be a conversation around these topics.
Okay. So I think this chat of ours is going to be very informative and instructive and interesting to our viewers and listeners. So, look, the China virus has hit us all, and there's been a lot of suffering in every country, some more than others. Um, Part of this is how our individual governments and health experts have managed the crisis, and the information. And it's useful to make a comparison on the approach taken by, let's say, Sweden and Israel to this and how we're doing. Um, First of all, Michael, I'm interested to learn about the attitude and the reaction for the sudden arrival of this and the effect of this virus. Um, by that, I mean, do Swedes discuss how, for instance, suddenly, over a short period, thousands of Swedes suddenly started dying and getting seriously sick with a virus? And do people really question and even hold China responsible for the global spread of the virus? Or they take it, well, it was spread and it's by some sort of anonymous sort of delivery?
The Chinese discussion is not that active. I think what's on people's mind here is here and now. How do I protect myself? How do we manage this? And in Sweden, you haven't, it took some time before you, and still we haven't really taken very stern actions here in Sweden. And the health authorities said it's going to pass when people came back from Italy with infections. And the spread was going inside of Sweden. They said it's going to pass. We passed the peak, and they've been kind of playing down the danger of what's going to happen here. So I don't think people sort of are in the blame game yet. The discussion is internal here. How do we fight it? What's the right way? Because we have a lot of deaths here compared to even our neighboring countries, Denmark and Norway, which we compare more to that than to Israel because it's closer, and the strategies are totally different between the countries. So that's kind of the discussion that's going on here. Everybody knows China is China. Everybody knows that it's an authoritarian government. We had spread of SARS and such from there before. And the people who are in Southeast in Asia, they were very much more alert to the danger than Sweden, because we never had the SARS epidemic coming here. So this is I call it a COVID. The China game is going to continue later on, and we will hear more about that. But I think that's going to be part of the aftermath.
Oh, Michael, I've been involved not only in researching but also advocating about the China's criminal responsibility by their negligence, in certain cases deliberate negligence, but also other criminal acts. And I do this because, quite frankly, even in civilian life, you can be found guilty of negligence and be fined or even imprisoned. For instance, if you drive a car carelessly and you injure or kill somebody, even worse, you can be put on charges. And there is ample evidence in holding China responsible for the death and destruction of what has happened in your country, both physical, health-wise, death, economically, and ours and others. And there are a number of countries who are now waking up to this and holding China responsible for this. But I don't go into this isn't going to be a legal discussion, but I think it's a discussion and a debate that ought to take place in Sweden as well. But I'm also interested in finding out from you the way that actually the authorities and the health experts and the government have approached how to tackle the virus outbreak in Sweden. Did you go into an immediate or gradual lockdown, or have you applied really the herd immunity attitude to fighting the virus, the effect of the virus?
It's a good question. The Swedish authorities really did not reveal their strategy publicly. It was there has been a lot of articles debating, what is the strategy, what are you planning, and there initially was a talk about herd immunity. The peak was passed, was going to be passed a few weeks after Italy, when people came back from the winter vacation in Italy, and then it was a spread internally, and the policy has been recommendations to the public: wash your hands, social distancing. Really no interventions by the government, no forceful quarantining people, tracking people. And now the spread is pretty widespread. You cannot do that anymore. And still, there's only public recommendations. You still can have congregations of more than 10 people, 49 people. They closed, I think, 4 restaurants because it was too crowded, and they opened them again a week later. So the restaurant is still open. It's still about washing your hands, social distancing, no mouth guards. So it's very much a trust. Do as we say, and you will be fine. The problem is not everybody does what you say anymore. We have a mixed. There's a generation issue where young people are very active outside. We also have 1 million immigrants from other countries who doesn't trust the government and authorities like Swedes do. There's a contract in Sweden between the people and the government, that the government will care for you from you're born until you're dead, and we trust them. And you see in the policy, in the polls yesterday, the Social Democrats that has been managing the crisis here, or no, I would say not managing the crisis, has gained 5% in the polls. So this says something about, even we have these high death figures, you trust the leadership. Maybe it's a human thing that in a deep crisis, that's what you have to do, because you don't have any other options than to trust them. So when democracies, when you can afford to fail. Now we cannot afford to fail, so you trust what you have. And I think the discussion with China, how people managed it, the economy, everything like this will come in the aftermath. I think everybody's very busy trying to manage their lives, their companies, the economics, the personal crisis. That's actually the same for everybody.
It surprises me what you've just said, and I'm going to ask Lawrence to put up on the screen the recent statistics as you and I speak together. The fact that you say that the ruling government or the ruling power is actually increasing in popularity, when you look at the statistics, I found this startling. It may be that the Swedes aren't looking at the statistics, because what we're finding, look, Sweden and Israel have more or less closely the same size of population. You have 10 million, we are now 9.2. But you have had in excess of 21,000 Swedes infected. We are still below 16,000. But the main statistic that's most startling is your death rate, your fatalities as of this time is 2,586. Our death rate is 222. A vast difference. This, to me, looks like the success of our system and the total failure of yours. I can't believe that Swedes are indifferent to massive deaths of their fellow countrymen and people to such a massive degree that they would actually sort of shake it off and say, well, okay, the government's doing a fine job. I can't see that. But even also the other statistics I've had preparing for the show, which I hope that Lawrence will show our viewers as well, is how Sweden is faring among the Scandinavian countries. All the other Scandinavian countries have death rates in the triple figures, maximum being Denmark with 452, Norway 210, and Finland 211. Again, Sweden's figures 2,586. Also the infection rate, 22,000 in Sweden, 7,700 in Norway, 9,000 Denmark, less than 5,000 in Finland. So even in Scandinavian scale, you seem to be failing there. The other item in preparation to speaking for you, Michael, just before we went on air, I went on to a BBC site which had the headline on from the 25th of April saying, "Has Sweden got its science right?" And it seems that as a discussion or a confrontation, if you have such things as confrontations in Sweden, between the or architect of the Swedish virus strategy, Anders Tegnell, who said, "We are doing what we're doing is working, and in a sense, we're beating it." If beating it is having a death rate approaching 3,000, it's hardly a way of beating it. But on the other side, there were questions about Tegnell's leadership. Dr. Claudia Hansen from the Karolinska Institute is among 22 scientists who wrote that, and I quote, "These people are officials without talent, and they've been put in charge of the decision making." Question to you is, what do you know about this, and has Sweden's exceptionalism been costly in human terms, do you think?
This is a big question. I will try to give you a little background, about the Swedish culture here.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a feeling in Sweden about being exceptional, and it's an exceptionalism in Sweden. We have had peace for 350 years. We have a very good, economic system. People are healthy, live longer, happier than in most countries. We have a democracy. We like to export our democracy feeling of how to run things are the right way. We're very, very, very secular. Sweden is one of the most secular countries in the world. And what happened in Sweden is that bureaucracy or the governing, the politicians really handed off a lot of responsibility to the technocrats, and they are not politicians, they're technocrats. They do a theory, the consequences are not there, they have their job, and the politicians can say that we left it to we follow their advice. We don't know anything about this, so we follow their advice, and then who's responsible? So that's one issue. In the end, how is Sweden going to manage the, let's say, the blame game for these numbers? The other is because there is no accountability really here, and Sweden is not good on accountability because everything is, it's a lot of consensus here. You compromise, you don't argue too much, but there has been a lot of debate in the papers obviously about the strategy, because the numbers speak for themselves. And there was a big article, and the major newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, is quite critical about the strategy. But Anders Tegnell, as of yesterday, said he's not sure the strategy is right anymore. And this illustrates that they've been backing down from day one. When I came to Sweden from Frankfurt, March 6th, nobody was looking at me. Nobody took my temperature. Nobody asked anything. I just walked right in. There was no quarantine. Israel had by then 14 days quarantine for everybody that came from abroad. You couldn't come into Israel without that. I just walked straight into the country. I could have come from Tehran. I could have come from any place where there had been outbreaks, and nobody asked me. So the spread was then already not controlled. But remember, we had peace for 350 years. Israel has an emergency, a readiness for emergencies because of the wars and everything. So this is a huge cultural difference, mindset difference on a crisis like this. Is a war. It's a war against the virus, and Israel can implement all its tools, the military, the controlling terrorists. You can track people. You know where they are. So if you keep the numbers down, you can then, when you let it up, track these people and not get the second wave, because the second wave is what's been discussed here. in the end, we all going to be the same. When you let up, there's going to be a second wave. And in the end, we're all going to have the same amount of death, the numbers of deaths. So in the beginning, it says we can control it. The second wave, in the end, there's going to be the same numbers, because what do you do when you let it up? And so we have the right way, and we're doing the herd immunity. They gave up the herd immunity argument now because they don't know if you even get immune. So the herd immunity, it's a non-argument, because you don't know about the immunity even if it happens. So in Sweden, they've given you different theories and backing down step by step. They've been backing down, abandoning their old statements. And the interesting thing is, Anders Tegnell, as you mentioned, is still very popular, and people go back him. And he's been wrong. Week after week, he's been backing down. So, and the numbers speak for themselves. Now he's himself starting to back down and getting concerned. I saw a headline, I didn't read the article, but we can expect 20,000 deaths and so on in Sweden. Oh. And it's a technocrat. It's not a religious society. We don't live together with our elderly. We put them in homes. We have other people taking care of them. So you don't have that close contact with your parents. And the value systems is kind of maybe more economical, more. And these are technocrats. Anders Tegnell is a scientist or was. So that plays a role in how you tackle this thing.
So we have, you mentioned the religious thing. Actually, this was actually an issue, turned out to be an issue here when it came to fighting the virus. Let me give you or our viewers a bit of a summary of how we approached it. Really, it was led by our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, when he knew that we had a problem here in Israel. One of the things he did was he got his health advisors together. He also got the military together, but he also outreached to world leaders. And he had to make a decision which direction Israel would go. Would it be the Swedish model or the British model with the herd immunity system, or would it be the lockdown system? And he decided to go on the route of isolation. But instead of doing it immediately, he knew the Israeli public wouldn't accept that. He had to impose a gradual lockdown, so that he would ease people into self-isolation. There were certain sort of avenues that he left open that were closed a bit slightly later. But for instance, we had a lockdown of industry, of all the shops, shopping malls and all the shops eventually, until we had a total lockdown. Now, and also this was backed up by having the Prime Minister and also health experts talk to us in the evening news broadcasts of how we should behave. It was done also by certain almost like advertising videos virtually, showing us the risk of doing simple things like opening up a door handle to a building and carrying the infections on your fingers and shaking hands to somebody, or delivering something, or pressing the button in an elevator and then passing that infection on to others. A sort of a startling video to educate the Israeli public. And then it went well. Certainly we had a certain problem with our young selfie generation who wanted to crowd and herd whatever instincts, but they, went into lockdown. I think also something that you said, that Israel is accustomed to emergencies, terror attack, war, rocket attacks, and we know how to quickly put ourselves out of harm's way. And this was done. The only weak link with this has been the ultra-Orthodox community, who live isolated themselves from the Israeli secular living. A lot of them don't even, for instance, have televisions. They have their own cultural, religious environment over there, and are somewhat isolated. It took them a very long time before they wanted to listen to the warnings, and it was almost like imposed on them. It was an imposed lockdown, to which they rebelled against. In fact, there have been certain instances where, for instance, one ultra-Orthodox person took a flight from New York. He knew he was infected, didn't declare it to anybody, infected the people on the plane flying into Israel, and then went to wherever he went, Bnei Brak or places in Jerusalem. And another one who went from Tiberias, knowing he was infected, but he wanted to get back to Jerusalem, his home in Jerusalem, for the Sabbath, for Shabbat, and he took a bus. And what Israel has introduced, we have worked with in the system have been, for instance, the Mossad and the Shin Bet, which is the external and internal intelligence units of Israel's security. The Mossad, for instance, were doing some amazing and covert things in the desperate need for equipment and protective clothing. They were instrumental in bringing in large supplies of ventilators and other equipment and protective clothing from certain countries, including countries that really only have covert relationship with Israel. And that helped our stockpile. But why I mentioned that, we were also using artificial intelligence and everything to trace and track down people who are known to have been infected, and yet were still wandering around. And one of those was a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox guy who took a bus from Tiberias to Jerusalem, and the bus was intercepted and the guy was arrested. And there have been other cases like that. Now, countries like America would look on that as infringement on privacy and things like this. But the Israeli attitude, based on something you said before, having faced with terrorism, somebody going around infected with a deadly disease is looked on as almost like a terrorist. Not okay, well, herd immunity. Either people will get well, or people will get sick, or people maybe die. We don't tolerate that sort of attitude. This is probably due to our experiences, our contemporary experiences, and also probably the Chidush Hashem of respecting every life. Person who saves one life is as if he saves the whole world. It's such Jewish ethics. Yeah. I would have thought that if Sweden had been a Jewish country, there is no way we were tolerated figures going to even be up to beyond 1,000, never mind approaching 3,000 with some sort of
Sweden is the religion here, the Christian, the Lutheran religion, which is the most predominant here, has basically the same values regarding life as Jewish. It's based on the Jewish ethics. So that is
it's a moral value.
It's a moral value, but also being the secular. And I think when the politicians abdicate and are not really, there is no accountability. I think also Bibi Netanyahu is a very vain person. We know that. And his aftermath is very important to him. And he would be judged on how many lives would be destroyed. That would be his legacy. And he's sensitive to that. That's why he didn't go into Gaza with people to fight Hamas in Gaza, because he would lose lives. I think that's one of the biggest reasons. He wouldn't win anything. So he actually didn't fight these wars to save lives.
But it's also, sorry to interrupt, Michael, but it's also a moral responsibility.
Absolutely.
I think it's a moral responsibility that too many European leaders are lacking.
Well, I think the Germans have been now quite successful. Angela Merkel they've done a really good job in Germany. The European, it's a mixed bag.
That's based on their Teutonic efficiency rather than a moral thing, I think.
There is moral there too. Some people, I think Angela Merkel has a decent moral. I wouldn't put ourselves
I agree.
on high horses.
I agree.
There are other people who have very high moral. There are, however, cultural. As you say, I don't think Sweden could have, even if they wanted to impose these measures, because they hadn't rehearsed them. There were no mechanisms in play to centralized managing crisis in a centralized way, to impose surveillance, because we don't have those mechanisms in place, because we don't do that. You do that because of of terrorism, and you have your own very special. You also have one international airport. It's easy to close off. We could have closed Stockholm. Stockholm Airport is the biggest airport. It could have been done. We only have 2 or 3, so it could have been done in Sweden. But the culture, the history, the way we do things with consensus, not imposing things, but a lot of volunteering, not really blaming anybody. A lot of things, anything goes here. That's why they did not. I don't think it was because they really believed and had a strategy, because they didn't really show the strategy here until now. And now it's starting to get late. We are starting to have too many people, and then we need to make a draconic lockdown. We don't have the plateau. Now the numbers are rising in the second city in Sweden, Gothenburg. They have an increased rate of people going into the hospital. Stockholm is maybe plateauing, but there are other places now are increasing. So we're not through with this here in Sweden, and I think it's because that was the easy way to do. It didn't require too much, and we hoped it would work, and it was not a very active decision, and not the coordinated management, not a real leadership. And I think that's going to be the discussion when this is over. Those 5% is going to go away, that they increase the popularity, and I hope there's going to be a discussion based on these numbers.
Yeah, as I said, it's sad. There's a feeling of sadness, really, that, as I mentioned before, that the ultra-Orthodox communities in Israel were slow in coming into the game and really understanding the lethality of what we're facing, and that bumped up the statistics. Otherwise, our figures would have been a lot lower. Very recent, last few days, the rise in numbers now seem to be among some Arab communities and also the Bedouin. And it may be, this is meant as a personal slide, that maybe these people are less disciplined than the Israelis per se have become. But the other statistic that has been troubling is obviously the death of the vulnerable, mainly the elderly people in nursing homes that have died here in Israel because of the virus and the effects of the virus. In your statistics in Sweden, do you know what are the rates of the elderly or people with pre-existing conditions with regard to the death rate?
That's where we get the majority of our figures. 90% of the deaths are from age 70 and up, and I think it's 80% from 80 plus, something like that. So it's the elderly that are vulnerable. We did not manage to protect them. We have in Stockholm, I think 2/3 of the elderly homes have COVID infection inside. So there is a disaster going on there.
How did it get there? By the kids coming to visit, or by the workers?
It was staff. You also have. You mentioned that the ultra-Orthodox society, the Bedouin and the Arab, and we also have immigrant societies, which are a little outside the society. They might not identify with the main culture and follow advice because they are not integrated fully, like in Israel. We have the same here in Sweden. A lot of these people work in the healthcare sector, helping the elderly, home care, low pay jobs. A lot of immigrants have those jobs, and also the fact that the COVID is asymptomatic. You can actually spread it without symptoms. So even if you feel good, you can spread it. And it came through the staff. It came through the staff, and now they're testing staff. There was not personal protection equipment. People stayed home. They took in new people who didn't know hygiene rules. So there are a number of factors that you could not protect the elderly. And some of the arguments I've heard is like, yeah, but they would die anyway later this year. 1 or 2 years later, they would all die. So, these are people who would have died within, a short time anyway. So I think that's kind of one of the excuses you hear. But it's a disaster in that area. And
It's,
that's
I find that a bit of a cynical attitude to take. All life is
yeah,
precious. But,
yeah.
one conclusion that I personally seem to have come to is that and it's contrary to what I said before, that the elderly and the health vulnerable people should be kept safely isolated. But there's a sense in the fading out of stage of the virus to allow people up to the age of 59, let's say, to return to work. Based on the statistics, we find that one or two people or people may come down with the sickness, but up to a certain age group, that like you mentioned, the mortality rate is very low. And in effect, this again, I repeat, contrary to what I said before, that maybe at this stage of the virus control, that this herd immunity might help people develop antibodies and become immune to this, and therefore they will perhaps not be a carrier even to the elderly at some stage in the future. And it would also help the country, yours and ours, to get the economy back on track and get people to feel more productive people again, rather than be locked down at home and the contrary sort of social norms and habits that can lead to a breakdown of marriage, violence, drugs, drink, suicides, or whatever for being unemployed. What do you say about that?
Uh, we are learning about this virus. The herd immunity seems to be a theory that might not be productive, because we don't know if you really create a long-term immunity at all with the virus.
Right.
So the herd immunity theory is very risky at this point, and this carries on to, if you can find a vaccine or not. So I think that and this is what other countries have done, like Australia, New Zealand, Israel is doing, not to to hold it at a low level that you can track and contain the virus. The containment, the hammer, and then going after the cases to keep this ratio of spreading to under one, that one person spread it to less than one more person, and that way you can suppress the prevalence of the virus in the population, and then you can get rid of it. And to do that, if you let it up like we done in Sweden, the volume of the volume of people to track and asymptomatic carriers prevent this kind of strategy. You cannot really track and isolate that many people. In Israel, Denmark, and Norway and Finland, who has been more draconic in the lockdown, can now decrease the number and with intensive testing also. Sweden has maybe a quarter or a fifth of the testing of Israel, and Israel is not happy with it. And the Swedish social minister said, health minister said, we're going to go up to 100,000 tests per week. That's what, and that's going to happen in 2-3 weeks. Israel is doing it already at that frequency, and they're not happy with it either. And Sweden are making their own tests, and so is Israel. So in order to fight the virus, the herd immunity is not the issue. The issue is containment, pushing it down, looking after it, making sure it's not spreading uncontrollably, and tracking it, and using face mask. Anything that can lower it is going to be a different mix. Tracking people, face masks, social distancing, but getting people back to work in a selective way, in a careful way, letting it up, but in a controlled fashion. I think that's what's going to happen in Israel. You cannot let it out and just send people back to work. In the US, it's going to be a disaster. My belief, that's without being an epidemiologist, when you're letting it out without reaching a threshold or dropping the amount, you said you were having less people coming in than being sick. You're recovering than being sick, then you can start letting down. But if you do it in the US, that you have an increase still, or peaks to come, and you let up, it's going to be an explosion. We understand that. Everybody understands that.
As a doctor, can you tell us what treatments are being used in Sweden for infected patients, both at early, medium stage, and also later stage? Is a controversial drug, the hydroxychloroquine, being prescribed for early stage patients? And also, in your opinion, how important is a vaccine? Everybody talks about a vaccine, but how important is a vaccine, considering that, for instance, that SARS disappeared without a vaccine?
Yeah, it relates to what I said before. There's a lot of trials in Sweden on different. The chloroquine had damaging effects also on the heart. There are very few controlled studies because controlled studies takes time, and you need to have a system to do it. So Sweden is very very, let's say, conservative in the way they perform these studies. I know in Israel there is a lot of testing, and you're sort of quicker on the trigger, happier on the trigger to do things. And I know several trials where you do antioxidant, using antioxidant strategies and so on, but they are not controlled. So we really don't know. The chloroquine had got a bad reputation here, and I think they stopped doing it. They stopped the study because they saw heart effects and other things, bad effects on the heart. I don't know if they use it on early stage. I'm not really. It's a lot about keeping the oxygen, keeping the inflammation down, and I think that there's a lot of things being tried and experimented, but there's very little data, and people don't come out with the data and say anything until they have something that they can stand behind. So that's not going to happen. There are there are people in ventilators, but what we did not discuss, and I think the vaccine, an efficient vaccine, is going to be 18 months, 12 months. First, you need to validate it, you need to test it, and you need to produce it, and then you need to distribute it. And these things takes time. I'm a CEO of a medical company. I know the kind of procedures you need to do, and you cannot let things out into the public that might be more harmful than helpful. So you need to establish that the vaccine is more helpful than harmful, and you need to prove that. And then you need to make it in a safe way, and you need to distribute it in a safe way. So all those things will take time. So we're looking at least a year away if we're not lucky. I know there's an Israeli company who was trying an oral vaccine. If that works, that could be a very fast way. We don't know yet. They're trying it. So that could be a quicker way. But saying all this, I think the strategy of containing the virus, that's what you did with SARS. That's how you very quickly closed down, isolated people, tracked the people with SARS. SARS was not as contagious, and it was very deadly, but it was less contagious, so it was easier to contain. This is a very, very contagious virus, so it's very hard to contain. So it's going to be time, and you need to combine several things, like I think you're doing in Israel, you're doing in other countries like Australia, Norway, Denmark. I think a combination of these measures, and then the other factor, what's going to happen in Sweden, is this week they are starting to discuss the rehabilitation of all these people being in ventilators, and the more people you have sick, the more people you have on ventilators. The rehabilitation is very, very long. Your body is totally broken after 2 weeks in a ventilator, and it takes months and maybe 6 months to rehabilitate after long ventilator treatment.
So are you saying that all the world, wherever you are, whether it's prime ministers, presidents, governors of states, or whatever, the demand was out for having ventilators all the time? But you have a theory that because ventilators are used on people in late stages, that in fact the ventilators have, in certain cases, in fact, advanced the death of certain patients on ventilators, that in fact ventilators could be detrimental?
No,
because
no,
you have a medical theory on that?
no. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying everybody knows being on a ventilator is a very tough on the body. That's why they don't put people with multiple diseases on ventilators, because they can't cope with it. That's known. But younger people can cope, but it's a long rehabilitation. What I'm saying is that having a high degree of the population being infected by COVID will increase the number of people, pure statistics, having to be on ventilators. And that in itself will create costs and pressure on the healthcare system in the post-rehabilitation treatment. By pushing down the numbers and decreasing the amount of people on ventilators, you also decrease the post effects on it. You might have other effects like suicide and drinking problems because of isolation, but there are also effects of having a big part of the population becoming sick, because it creates a pressure on the healthcare system in the aftermath. Definitely.
Well, in Israel, as you said before, that Bar-Ilan, for instance, has a new technology that reduces diagnostic time down to just 15 minutes. And in Israel, Israeli scientists at Magal are making progress on a vaccine, that's something we just discussed, up in the north of Israel. Teva is also advancing certain things that would help against this particular virus. Is there any sort of similar advances that are taking place in Sweden by Swedish scientists, biologists?
Sure. I mean, the Karolinska Institute, the bacteriology lab, are creating and testing. They're testing external tests, but they're also creating their own test to be able to increase the testing. And they have, by the government, been authorized to produce these tests. There are studies going on. There is a lot. There are several groups in the virology. You know, we have very famous research places here too, and they're of course very active, and they get funding for this. So Israel is a little quicker, and the government is maybe a little more proactive with regards to giving grants for things. In our company, we over a month ago got a memo says, in what way can you help the COVID? Can your product be helpful in the epidemic? We got such from the Ministry of Finance. You know, what way can you help with the Israeli innovation authorities? I tried to import and help and offered personal protection equipment from a Korean company that we collaborate with, who are FDA approved, CE approved, Korean FDA. They have personal protection equipment and testing. And I offered it to Karolinska, to the central purchasing. I got very little answers. Nobody called me and followed up on, you know, who are you? How can we get it? It was like, we're taken care of, we're doing all this. And I felt it was kind of passive. So there is the research community are basically independent on the politics, and they do what they have big international collaboration. They're probably working together with US and Israeli researchers today, and the healthcare system is a very good healthcare system, but there is on the central level being, you know, quick-footed, you know, moving quickly, being less bureaucratic. I think that's very problematic. However, Israeli authorities can be very bureaucratic. I have dealt with the Israel economic, but they are very much into the detail. They go in and mix with the actual execution. And here, the Swedish politicians and there is a division, who does what, and you don't step on it, because for legal reason you cannot step in and take over. So it's separated in Sweden in a much more organized way. But when there is a crisis and you need to sort of have a cohesive action plan, that is a hindrance in the Swedish society and how it's built, because we didn't have the war. We didn't need to do that. Everything was like a machine. It's like a big tanker has to turn. And I could compare that to Israelis, which is like a bunch of patrol boats that can turn very quickly and change direction. So this, you're comparing a tanker with small patrol boats, and this is how it's all structured, and this, the background. It's not that Swedes are less active or so on, but there are there's a sense of urgency is not maybe in always in the Swedish mind.
This is one of the things that Israel, as you and I know, we've just celebrated our 72nd birthday in Israel, but we're actually a young and very nimble country. That's why we pride ourselves on being the startup nation with its innovation. And we have a government, again, led by Bibi, who is a free market economist, who give the incentives to all these startups and whatever. And this is it's become a driving force for Israel itself. But while we're talking about this, why don't you tell us about your own medical company that's based in Israel? Where's it based? What's it doing?
I got into the company. Actually, it started in the synagogue. So I met someone who met someone else. This is how it does in Israel. You meet someone, you share experiences, you try to help out. And in the end, I invested in the company and I actually changed the direction we had. It started with a condom actually, but I worked in the hospital and I had a nightmare when I worked there 40 years ago as a nurse, collecting urine. And I said I wanted to change this condom to a urine collection device. And the founder and I agreed that we were going to do that. So we created first the urine collection device for men that's external and wouldn't leak, because this is a problem. And then we went on and created an external urine collection device for women. Incontinent women, elderly women, this is a huge problem because they get wounds and there's an overuse of catheters, which gives infections to elderly women and they die. So this catheter, who is now on the way out to the market, we have a distributor in Israel, we have distributors in the US, and we are working to get here in Sweden too, and we have production. It's a urine catheter that sits on the outside. Collects urine, and you don't get wet. You don't get these diaper rashes. You don't have to change in the middle of the night and wake up the patient. You need less staff in the old age home nighttime, and in the hospitals you don't need to put a catheter in to collect the urine. You can use our device to collect and measure urine for women who maybe have diuretics and heart problems and so on, and that decreases infection risk and staff. And actually, in this COVID-19 virus pandemic, this device really has a potential to decrease the number of contacts between staff and patients. So the risk of propagating the virus is decreased to contagion. So we are, but now everybody, it's so chaotic out there. So we are trying to get pilots into different places for them to help them out. But I think in a few weeks we will start pilots. We already tested it in Laniado Hospital in Israel. We have it on the market in the US, and it works very well. So it's a very exciting product and can really help a lot of people.
Interested to hear you mention Laniado Hospital. That's based here in Netanya, where I'm speaking to you from. That's very good.
Oh, yeah, we are. They are our.
I'm always very keen to help promote new Israeli innovation. So, tell us what's the name of your company, and if anybody of our viewers want to know more about it, where can they go to? Is there a website or is there an email address where people can learn about it, or even maybe invest in the company and learn more about it?
Yeah, our email address is, the company's name is TillaCare. You see the name under my name. You see the name TillaCare, and you just go to www.tillacare.com, and there you have an address to my Swedish address. We have a US address. We have an Israeli address there, and you can send a mail to us for a request. We are looking for distribution and sales channels globally. and we are collaborating with, so we can channel and we can produce devices. We also have an instruction movie, so if you come to our homepage, we can send you to and show you exactly how to deploy the device and so on. We are just finishing an investment round now, and I actually closing it right now. So during the COVID epidemics, to raise a substantial number of dollars are quite exciting. But I think there is a big need and a big potential for this product, and it really can help a lot of people to have a better quality of life, not being wet, not the smell, all these problems. And actually, from an environmental problem, diapers is a huge problem with transportation and storage and landfills, and we can decrease that. We can't substitute all of it, but we can decrease that, and we can probably decrease a lot of the hospital-acquired infections through that you get from catheters. So I'm very excited about it, and I'm putting a lot of energy and effort into this company. And working with the Israeli team and Swedish team and American, it's a very rewarding. I have like one foot in Israel and one foot here in Sweden, and my wife is American, so it's pretty. I have a good time.
That's very good, excellent. Good luck with it. I mean, but thank you very, very much for joining me. It was nice to meet with you on air. I hope we get to meet personally, either if I ever get to Sweden or when next time you're in Israel. Thank you for the contribution, and viewers. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Dr. Michael Cohn. I hope you found it interesting and instructive. If there's anything there that you need to know about it or further, you can contact me at theviewfromisrael@gmail.com, and look out for the link and spread it and share the information that Dr. Cohn has given us with your friends and acquaintances. Thank you. This is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel, signing off from Israel. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, Lawrence. Where is he? I think he's gone.
He fell asleep.
I think you and I may have been talking to each other and he's not recorded it. Oh. Okay. How was it? Yeah.